Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Alexis Hermes and I serve as the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer for the Michigan DNR. I'm excited to have you all with us at our closeout event celebrating Black History Month, and this is going to be a really good one. Today, before we start our presentation, I just want to go over a few quick notes. This session, along with all of the Black History Month events, is being recorded and will be available on the DEI SharePoint by the end of the month. And then this event in particular, along with the first event that we had, will be on YouTube. If you have questions throughout, please enter them into the chat box and we'll read them at the end. Keeping in mind that there is a 30-second delay on this Microsoft Teams platform. So we do have a question and answer period for the end designated, and so keep that in mind as we go through this interview today. Captions can be enabled on your Microsoft Teams platforms. Below, there should be an ellipses at the bottom for you to enable if you need captions. And at the end of the presentation today, we will send a link to a brief 3-minute survey for you to complete. We ask that everyone complete it and provide feedback so we can capture obviously feedback for today's event, but improve on our events for the future and bring more what you want to see into the department. Before we get into it, I just want to take some time to recognize the DEI team for their help, especially the market and event sub-team for their contributions in planning efforts towards this event and the previous events for Black History Month. And finally, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to Lisa Hobaugh and Chris Cargill from Parks and Recreation Division, who are helping behind the scenes today. They've helped for our first 2 events and this final one. I greatly appreciate your assistance. So let's get into it. It's an honor to be hosting this event. The 2 individuals who I'm about to introduce are known for their amazing work in their communities, leadership, and contributions to conservation. I had the pleasure of meeting and working with them early on, back when I was a student assistant. So my heart is full today of so much joy and appreciation that they're able to be on here. So let's get started. Sorry. It's my pleasure to introduce our guest interviewer, Dr. Hurley Coleman, Jr., pastor. Reverend Coleman, or Pastor Coleman, has a very rich history in leadership. He's the second born to the union of Greater Coleman Temple founders, the late Dr. Hurley and Martha Coleman. Graduating from Saginaw High School in Saginaw, Michigan, he went on to receive his Bachelor of Arts degree from Eastern Michigan University in Community Recreation Administration. He began his professional career as recreation coordinator of Saginaw County. Later, as a recreational superintendent for the city of Saginaw, the Anderson Water Park is an example of his accomplishments. In 1989, he became the director of parks for Wayne County, Michigan, or Wayne County Department of Public Service, excuse me. In 2009, he was promoted to assistant CEO of Wayne County, and he served as the director of Detroit Recreation Department from May until September 2001. Pastor Coleman served on the DNR Natural Resources Commission from 2007 to 2011 and was inducted into the Michigan Recreation and Parks Association, otherwise known as MParks, Hall of Fame in 2011. Pastor Coleman also served the Lord and the church faithfully. He was saved and filled with the Holy Ghost in 1978 and accepted his call to ministry on Mother's Day in 1979. He served as a national and jurisdictional adjunct for Bishop Earl J. Wright, who was his pastor for 12 years. He served as the chairman of Jurisdictional AIM Convention, the College of Musicians, and secretary of the Elders Council. After accepting the mantle of leadership for Greater Coleman Temple, COGIC, he was also appointed to the superintendent of the Liberty District. In January of 2011, Pastor Coleman was appointed administrative assistant to Bishop Samuel O. Duncan, prelate of the Southwest 3rd Jurisdiction, where he continues to serve. As far as national appointments, he was selected to be an overseer for the National Adjutancy Corps for the Churches of God in Christ, Inc. Pastor Coleman received an honorary doctorate degree of divinity from St. Thomas Christian College and Theological Seminary in Jacksonville, Florida, in December of 2011. In February of 2014, Pastor Coleman and the World Outreach Campus Ministries became part of Perfecting Faith International Fellowship under the leadership of Bishop-elect Marvin L. Winans. Dr. Coleman Jr. is married to evangelist Sandra Coleman, They are the proud parents of 3 children, Natoya Hurley Coleman III and Tasha Coleman, and have 3 grandchildren. And Pastor Coleman will be interviewing former DNR director Rodney Stokes. So, taking a break here because, just phenomenal. Sorry. Rodney Stokes retired from the state of Michigan after 33 years working for the Department of Natural Resources and 2 years in the office of Governor Rick Snyder. He brings a great depth and breadth of experience in policy development, civic engagement, natural resources, and outdoor recreation, anchored on the bedrock of public policy. In the Department of Natural Resources employee publication, Mr. Stokes stated, "I consider myself a public servant. I wake up every day and tell myself that if I can do just one thing every day for someone who doesn't have the chance or ability to pay me back, then it was a pretty good day." Stokes' service in state government began in 1977 and subsequently included a series of positions in the Department of Natural Resources. His contributions were across a broad mix of the department's core missions, including leadership positions in the Recreation Division, Michigan Natural Resources Trust Fund Program, Grants Administration, Chief of Real Estate Division, and then as Chief of the Parks and Recreation Division. Stokes' tenure as a state leader was matched by his performance as the director of Detroit Recreation Department from 2002 to 2003 and director of Gainesville, Florida Recreation and Parks Department 2003 to 2004. He rejoined the DNR as a legislative liaison in 2004 and served as chief of staff to the director and acting chief of law enforcement division. Stokes' practical experiences build upon a strong academic foundation, including a Bachelor of Arts from Tennessee State University in Recreation Administration, a Master of Science from Michigan State University, Parks and Recreation Resources. Additionally, he served for more than 15 years on the Curriculum Advisory Committee for the Parks, Recreation, and Tourism and the College of Ag and Natural Resources at Michigan State University. He also served in leadership positions on Recreation and Parks Association boards for both the state and national levels. Stokes was also committed to community service, including stints on East Lansing School Board, East Lansing Planning Commission, East Lansing Recreation Committee, Eastern Land Resource Council, Michigan State Exposition and Fairgrounds, Board of Directors for Big Brother, Big Sisters of Mid-Michigan, and as chair of the Deacon Board at Paradise Missionary Baptist Church. Stokes and his wife, Linda, are the proud parents of Rhonda, Saya, and Keenan, and have 5 grandchildren. So, wow. When I tell you that I still stand on the shoulders of giants, I really mean it. And it's my incredible honor to just be here today and now being able to turn it over to Reverend Coleman and take over. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alexis. What a tremendous job you did with that. Didn't she do a great job, Rod?
Yeah, she did a fantastic job. We appreciate all of that.
It's amazing to hear her recant all that you've done in your career, Rod. For those who maybe don't know, Rodney and I have been not only associates and fellows in the business of parks and recreation delivery and government services, but we've just been good friends for a lot of years. And it dates back to maybe even before Alexis was walking around. But I'm excited to see her, Rodney. Just the fact that she's doing what she's doing speaks a lot to where you are and what you have done. When I first met you, it was back in the early 80s. You had recently begun your career in 1977 with DNR. And we met on because I was working with the Governor's Recreation Advisory Committee, and that was an introduction to me to the wealth and the breadth of the Department of Natural Resources. But what many people may not know is that your job with the DNR wasn't your first job in Parks and Recreation. They may not know how long in your life you've been a leader and a trendsetter. I heard a little story about you when you were back in your hometown. Can you talk a little bit about how you got started in Parks and Recreation?
Sure. First of all, let me say hello to all of my friends in the Department of Natural Resources. It was a wonderful career. I met a lot of great people during that time, and still have a lot of friends that are associated with or either working for the department. So, but yes, I've been around Parks and Recreation, Hurley, for a very long time. When I was 12 years old, I actually got a job at a recreation center in my hometown in Dalton, Georgia, and worked there every summer until I was about 15 years old, when I got a job there working year round. So I've been in the field for a very long time, and it has carried me places and allowed me to have opportunities to do a number of things. So yes, it's Parks and Rec has been in my blood since I was young, and I still am very passionate about it.
Now, this is Black History Month, so we can be honest about the truth of our history. And when you started in Parks and Recreation in that rec center, it wasn't rec centers that we see today. We were living in segregated time. I remember my first job on the playground program. We had playgrounds on our side of town and then playgrounds on the other side of town. And there were some challenges that we had to face, especially in leadership. You, as a young leader, had some really serious challenges. I didn't know that you were a swim coach.
Yes, when I would start working at the center, my first job was at the swimming pool, and I was handling the bags. Back in the day, they didn't make the type of swimming trunks and bathing suits that they have, where they dry real fast. So people would have to come change clothes, and I would be the bag person to handle can keep their items and stuff. And so I worked my way up there to as a lifeguard, and then as a swim coach. And in fact, a newspaper in my hometown just recently published an article about the swim team in my hometown of Dalton, Georgia. And in that story, it talked about, we had two swimming pools. We had the swimming pool for the blacks, and we had the swimming pool for the whites. And in that article, it talked about the three young men who were teenagers who came and integrated the pool, the white quote white pool in my hometown. And they wrote the article, and they talked to the director of Parks and Recreation for the city, and he said it was a great transition, really didn't have any problems and stuff. But what the director didn't know, that I brought those three individuals over to the pool and gave them money to pay for them to go in to swim. And I was working for the Parks and Rec department at the time. And so I didn't want them to know that I was put them up there, because I thought I would get fired. But I wasn't far away from watching what they were doing, because one of those individuals was my younger brother. I didn't want my mom to my dad to get all over me if something happened to my little brother. So, but yes, I was involved in that, in integrating this swimming pool in my hometown in Dalton, Georgia, and taught, I don't know how many people how to swim. I published that article on Facebook recently, and I've heard from a number of young, well, they were young at the time, people who wrote me and told me that I taught them how to swim, and they were on the swim team and the things of this nature. So yeah, it goes way back.
But see, that's the reason I wanted to bring that up is that ethic, Rodney. It's that ethic that has caused you to pursue what you did in your career the way you did it, because there was always this desire to help make sure that everybody could enjoy resources and the benefits of recreation. And so when you got to Michigan and got that job at the DNR, what was the beginning of your career with the DNR?
Well, the beginning of my career with the DNR, I'd have to admit it wasn't the best experience, I should say. A lot of people asked me, how did you get involved in natural resources? And my first experience in natural resources was not that good. Back in Dalton, Georgia, in my hometown, my uncle used to take me and my cousin hunting and fishing a lot. And there was not a lot of public land in and around my hometown for us to hunt and fish on. So he would have to get permission from white landowners to go hunting or go fishing in their ponds or their impoundments. And even though he had permission, we would still get chased off those properties and those ponds by other hunters and anglers who were white. And I could always look at in my uncle's eye, and he knew that he had me and my cousin Gary with him, and he knew he didn't want anything to happen to them. But the look in his eye to me said, if these kids weren't with me, this situation would maybe a little different and stuff. And so when I came to finish school and came to Michigan, I had a job working for the Lansing Parks and Recreation Department, and I was in graduate school at Michigan State University.
And I'm not going to put that against you either.
All right. But I had applied for a job with the DNR a couple of years before, like in '75. And my reception that I got at the HR department and talking to some of the people in state parks at the particular time was not that good. But I went to work for the city of Lansing, and as I said, was in graduate school. And my major advisor at Michigan State told me that the DNR was looking for someone with experience in Parks and Rec. And I decided I wasn't going to apply because of that previous experience, but he kept on edging me to go on, and I did. And I talked to a guy, and you remember this name, Joe Seavey.
Joe Seavey, yep.
Joe Seavey was head of Recreation Services Division for the Department of Natural Resources. Yeah. And in that conversation with him, even before the interview, we spent about 15 minutes talking about the recreation, his experience and my experience in local government. He was interested in my family and things of this nature. And so that gave me a different perception that I had gotten a couple of years earlier. And so I had said, I could work for this agency. Long story short, he hired me, and Joe was a wonderful, wonderful supervisor. I mean, and knew the recreation business backwards and forward. And I learned a lot from him. And I started working for the DNR and really enjoyed my experience going around the state, helping local units of government establish parks and recreation departments, helping local units of government establishing parks and recreation facilities for their communities and stuff. And so it was a wonderful opportunity. So I really enjoyed doing that.
It's amazing how that happened, because my experience in park and recreation is not dissimilar from that. As a matter of fact, you reminded me of a moment that we had at one point in time, and we were all members of Michigan Recreation and Parks Association, and we were doing things across the state, but there were 3 African-American men who were involved in resource-based parks and recreation. And that's not to take anything away from, urban parks and city parks, but I was in county parks. Ernest Burkeen was in Lower Huron Metro Parks, and you were in the state park. And we wound up working together on a lot of things that were resource-based. Did you find yourself moving in a different level as resource-based parks and recreation? Looks like we may have an issue here. Are we operating okay?
I think we may have just lost Director Stokes.
Well, let's try to get him back, because this is a real turning point. Rodney has been giving you giving everybody a good foundational perception of how he got involved in Parks and Recreation. And it's critical for us to understand, especially during Black History Month, that there has always been this desire on the part of some to create equity, to create opportunities and equity for as many as possible. But there always had to be a person. There had to be a person from both sides. He mentioned Joe Seavey, who was the chief of recreation. And I knew Joe Seavey and worked with Joe Seavey, and I saw how he intentionally made ways for communities of color, communities and individuals of color to be included in programs. There's a lot of times that Joe created created opportunities for local communities. I remember seeing him talk to cities like Inkster and Detroit and Saginaw and Flint and places that may not have had access to parks and recreation for certain portions of their city, for the resources, for the trust fund, for land and water conservation fund, those funds that help develop the programs. And then Rodney, of course, was a key person in making all that happen. Alexis, you let me know if I'm, and everybody, you guys let me know what I need to do, because I'm anxious to get back in connection with Rodney, and I understand these technical glitches.
Thank you, Reverend Coleman. We are trying to get him back. He had an internet connection issue. So, but I appreciate you sharing the importance around Black History Month. And just that backstory was really important. So yeah, we're working on getting him back soon, and hopefully he'll be here. If not, we'll have him call in and we'll share our screen just so he can share from his phone.
Well, let me talk to you about what's going on, Alexis, and just tell you how I feel. Because many people don't know that I was a part of the Department of Natural Resources Commission, the DNR Commission, being appointed by Governor Granholm. And my experiences on the commission were an unbelievable learning period for me to understand the wealth of investment that the state has in natural resources, especially in places of leadership. And there are parts of the DNR that there were not many people of color involved, not only in leadership, but in activity at all. And to see how that has developed over the years and how that has improved and expanded. There have been some tremendous people that have developed their careers, and it's exciting to see you, Alexis, operating in this role with the department now.
Oh, absolutely. I appreciate you sharing that. It's been an incredible, I think I'm getting ready to go on 2 years in this role. And so to be able to get into these spaces and elevate voices and folks who've been in these roles or in these spaces, and to try to work to create more opportunity for those in our user base and within our workforce has been phenomenal. Yeah. So I appreciate the opportunity. Events like this, I mean, I'm just incredibly excited and honored to be able to work on this. And for all of our events the ones that we had in the past and the ones that we intend to carry forward, are created with the intention to elevate the voices and perspectives of those who've come before us, who are working with us still, to attract and inspire those who are going to be coming in the future. I think we have Director Silverstag.
And the fact that
okay, can you guys hear me now?
We can hear you.
Can you see me?
I can see you too.
Okay, I'm sorry. I lost internet connection. I apologize for that.
Well, that's okay. I've done that a lot myself. But we were at a point that was really, really a turning point, because we were talking about African American who are involved in resource-based recreation, resource-based parks and recreation services. And I was saying that it was you in the DNR, Ernest Burkeen with the Lower Huron Metro Parks, and I was working in county parks. I worked in Saginaw County and then with Wayne County.
That's correct.
That brings us to another point about how you, as an individual, Rodney, was so instrumental in making big things happen throughout the state of Michigan, with the Natural Resources Trust Fund, with the Land and Water Conservation Fund, with the Recreation Bond, with the Recreation Passport. How did you wind up being the guy and all of that stuff, Rod? How did that happen?
Early, I think a lot of it goes back to what I was talking about earlier, and growing up in my hometown when access was a problem. Okay. And one of the things that my goal was, I always said I wanted to have a role in how people spent their leisure time. I wanted to be a part of figuring out how people spent their leisure time, and to make sure that they had access to the things that were available to them. And so once I got to the DNR and I saw the vast network of natural resources and recreation experiences that department had to offer, and I saw very little people of color involved in those, then it became my passion that I wanted to get more people involved. But more importantly, whether they were involved in them at all, was that they had access to them if they chose to. I didn't want anyone to be ran off of property for participating in recreation opportunities. I didn't want people to see a beautiful beach and say, you can't go there to swim, or to have a great fishing spot and it would only be available to certain people and stuff. And so I made it part of my passion and career to make sure that access was available. And that's why the trust fund was so important to me, because the trust fund acquired land and built facilities that made these activities available to people. The Land and Water Conservation Fund, which was a federal funded grant program, made these opportunities available for people. And I took a note from the federal government's Land and Water Conservation Fund and made sure it was included in all of Michigan's grant programs, that you had to be, these facilities had to be open and available to everyone, number one. Number two, that it couldn't be charged exorbitant fees or differential fees, I should say, for individuals. So some people, some communities at the time were charging differential fees for residents and non-residents. And to try to keep non-residents out, right, they would charge fees that were exorbitant, and then people couldn't afford to pay. So we put in our grant programs that if you got a grant from us, then your differential fees could not be such that it's going to discriminate against people who were wanted to participate in those. So those types of things became a passion of mine, and also trying to get people, particularly in our urban areas, particularly people of color, to come and take part in the activities that the DNR had to offer.
Let me take advantage of what you just said, though, Rodney. You said we put it in our program, the Land Trust Fund program. I think it's important for people to understand that that's what you were doing. You were organizing, you were running, you were, once the law passed for the Land Trust Fund, for the Michigan Recreation Bond, or for the Land Trust Fund, once the trust fund legislation passed, there had to be administrative rules. You were there working with the legislature and with the administration to write the rules. And then when they came, the rules came to manage this fund, you were the guy that not only managed it, managed the rules, and then taught local communities how they could access it, letting them know the pressure. That's the PowerPoint that you were in. And what was so crazy to me, as I look back at it, Rodney, it wasn't as if you were acting like you were this big time Lord of the Rings or anything, but you had so much influence. Can you think about, can you just talk about how you feel about looking back over your career and being blessed and maybe being ordered by your gift and calling from God to provide that kind of leadership and influence to make sure that across the state, these resources are accessible and available?
Well, Hurley, a lot of it goes back to the philosophy that I adopted for myself a long time ago. I don't know where I saw this, but Alexis read it as part of my bio, and that was, I was a public servant. And if I could spend every day doing something for someone who didn't have the ability or capability to pay me back, then it was going to be a good day. So I saw myself as a public servant. And as it relates to these grant programs, one of the things that I instilled in our staff was that this was not our money. This money belonged to the people. Our job is to give the money to the people. And we shouldn't make rules and regulations that was going to prevent people from accessing these funds. And so but we had to have criteria, we had to have some standards, we had to have some guidelines. So let's go out and do grant workshops around the state and teach the people how to apply for the funds. It's no secret. We don't have no secrets. Let's just make it available. We had open book. I mean, we were transparent. This is how you get the grants from the DNR. And it was our job to get the money out to the people. The money was not going to do us any good sitting in the DNR and stuff. So I wanted us to have the money getting out to the local units of government. And that was the same thing with the divisions within the DNR, Wildlife Division, Fisheries Division, Parks Division, and others got grants from the DNR as well. And one of the things that the trust fund did was help solve a huge problem, particularly in our Wildlife Division and our State Forest, as well as Parks Division. It was able to buy in holdings within those facilities, because if you had a 40-acre piece of land in a state forest, then that was owned by someone else, then that eliminated much more, like 160 acres of hunting land, because you can't shoot close to a residence and stuff. So those programs not only benefited local units of government, but it was a valuable tool within the department to resolve some of our land issues and trespass issues that we had within the department. So that's basically the way I looked at it.
That turns another page for me, Rodney, because when I was sitting on the commission and I would see these reports coming in, and I learned that there was so much that the department was doing, and then I found out that all of the divisions in the Department of Natural Resources had some interaction with Rodney Stokes in one way or another. Wildlife, fisheries, law enforcement, parks, resources, everything, all of them had some Rodney Stokes interaction. And you became one of those persons that kind of was a conduit to help even divisions to overcome issues between divisions. How did that feel?
Well, what it did, Hurley, it helped people within the DNRs get to know me as me. I like to go back a little bit, and since we're talking on Black History Month, when I first started in the DNR, I would get on the elevator, and there would be women that would get off the elevator. It wouldn't be their floor and stuff, but they would get off because they were, for whatever reason, I don't know if I didn't see myself as being threatening, but that happened. And one of the ways that I said to myself, I'm not going to let these individuals run me out. So I said, once they get to know me, I think they will see that I'm not a threat. And so one of the things that I did, I started a DNR softball league. Okay. And so they got to know me outside of work, and running that league and seeing me in a different setting. They got to know me, and the non-threatening attitude, I think, went away. And so again, sports, recreation was something that bridged that together, just like it did with my young brother and those guys that integrated that swimming pool in my hometown. I used sports to kind of bridge things together. And so people got to know me in that. And then I began to work with them on the trust fund and land and water conservation fund for their particular programs in their division. And I would say the trust fund, those grant programs helped probably develop my career in management tools better than anything, because I had to interact with people. I had to get to know them. They had to get to know me. We became very, personable and stuff. And so I credit those grant programs for really establishing my career within the DNR, and for not only to get the people in the DNR to know me, but throughout the state.
I said something a little earlier in this conversation about the fact that there always has to be a person. There has to be a person that opens doors. There has to be a person that builds bridges. There has to be a person that can make things happen. And we may not all have the Martin Luther King moniker. We may not all have that name, but we all have the potential at some point in our life to be that drum major. And it seems to me that as we walk through your career from the beginning in 1977 to the pinnacle of being the director of the Department of Natural Resources, Rodney, when I think about this, and I'm in my 60s. I'm probably a little older than you now. I know you're a lot older than me, but we have had times when we still say it's the first African American to do, first African Americans, da 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 da. But when you took on that role as the director of the Department of Natural Resources, it was a significant statement, not only within the department, not only within the state, but throughout all the recreation and parks field, because we knew you, not only locally, but we knew you nationally. By that time, you were on the national level, work with national parks and recreation, national conservation program, and it was big. It was big. So talk about that, Rodney. Talk about how you wound up at the pinnacle of parks and recreation and natural resources leadership in the state of Michigan.
Well, Hurley, first of all, thank you for that. But I think in my career in the Department of Natural Resources, I started at the entry level, and I think I hit every one of in state government. There were numerical numbers like recreation activity specialist 9, 10, 11. I think I hit every one of those numbers, 9 through up to became division chief of state parks at an 18 level, and then next thing it was director. I took those steps. There were no shortcuts. Okay, I walked every one of those steps to get to where I was in the department, and on the national level. I mean, I was active statewide. I was active nationally. I felt that it was my time, but was I surprised when I was asked, got the job as director? I would say yes, because in 2002, I left the department and came down and worked with you down in the city of Detroit. Mm-hmm. And there was a movement within the department to get me out and stuff. And so certain people were threatened by me. Mm-hmm. And I said at the time that I could leave because I felt I could find a job, where the persons who were threatened by me, they had their jobs, and I didn't think they didn't think they could get another one. But I eventually was able to come back, thanks to Becky Humphrey and Keith Charters and a few others that asked me to come back. But I just felt like if you treat people right, if you do the right thing, and if you're in it for the right reason, good things will happen to you, and it did. But I have to admit, I was surprised when I got the call to be the director, because I was on my way out to retire in 2010 when I got the call from then Governor Rick Snyder to be the director.
Well, you've accomplished some great things. You got more awards than than James Earl Jones, and you got awards from every level, and they're well deserved. So the awards that go on the wall and go on your shelves, as the trophies and all those things, they mean a lot. They talk about what you've done. But if you look at your career, what are some highlights of things that you'll never forget that have meant so much when you look back over your career? What are some things that stand out?
Well, some of them may seem small to people, but I have gone into communities where there were no recreation at all. And I go back and I look at them now and the parks and recreation that they have, and they're offering their people. That means a lot to me. I worked with a gentleman named Tom Bailey who worked for one of the land conservancies up north. There was this one community who wanted a beach, and they wanted a public beach, and a lot of the homeowners up there didn't want a public beach around their expensive homes. But we were able to acquire, one gentleman there had some ownership on the beach, and he said, I want to sell this land for a public beach. And he took a beating from his neighbors, but we ended up providing a beach for the public in that particular county. I can't get on have this interview and not talk about the Detroit riverfront.
Oh,
I mean,
man, that Detroit
when,
riverfront.
I remember when I first moved to Michigan and started going to Belle Isle and started going to Detroit, I used to look across the river at Canada, and I was envious of their riverfront.
Yeah.
And so, I would say someday, particularly when I start working on the grant programs, I say someday Michigan is going to look like that, or Detroit is going to look like that. And then I met a lady that named Harriet Saperstein.
Harriet Saperstein, yep.
Harriet was the planner for the City of Detroit Parks and Rec Department.
Yep.
She came in with this plan of linked riverfront parks along the Detroit River. Well, when she first proposed the idea in the DNR and wanted the DNR to assist, there were people that thought she was crazy.
Yeah.
But I went in to talk to Joe Seavey, and he was one of the few people who felt that this was doable. And but then Joe left and retired, and so then I was like the only person standing around listening to Harriet and trying to make this thing work. But in reality, it came about. I mean, Belle Isle, that's my baby. Milliken State Park, I have to say, that's my baby. The Outdoor Adventure Center down there. I mean, those were all things that I really dreamed about. And you were even involved as part of that process. I don't know if you remember, but it was you, Ernie Burking, myself, Keith Charters. I think we had Dennis Archer on this boat. I think he was the mayor at the time.
Ed McNamara.
Yeah, McNamara. And we took a boat ride on the Detroit River, and we were pitching the idea of a state park on the Detroit River. And then things start happening.
I'll never forget it, Rod. We were on that boat, and we were talking about it was the Wayne County, the city of Detroit, and the state of Michigan. We were talking about I can't remember the initial conversation, but we started talking about quality of life and what it meant and what kind of things could happen to invest in it. And the three of us were all in our roles in Parks and Recreation. And all of us were vocal, but we always had this thing that we could always sense how to come together. And when you proposed it in the conversation, Keith Charters was there, Mayor Arch was there, County Executive McNamara was there, Governor Engler was there, and we all kind of fell in behind you. And before we knew it, there was a conversation about setting aside to get that thing done, and it started rolling. So, Rodney, you really have the benefit of seeing a dream come to fruition, because you were able to walk through with the funding, with the development. I mean, all those acquisition projects that we were talking about. At that time, we had just passed the millage in Wayne County for the first time. And we were talking about trying to do something with Fort Wayne. So we were looking at from the Ambassador Bridge all the way to Belle Isle.
Exactly.
And you laid that out, but that's, again, it's a person in a place at the right time with the right motivation, and you had an opportunity to see that.
It also took some divine intervention as well, Hurley, because if you remember, GM had just bought the Renaissance Center for their headquarters. For whatever reason, Detroit was talking about putting the casinos on the river, and then someone talked them out of it. And the land that they had been assimilating for those casinos was now available.
Yep.
So we were, through working with Keith Charters and the trust fund and stuff, we were able to accumulate the funding to buy those lands and to get the city to give us some of the land. GM was able to give us some land. And we ended up creating Milliken State Park. And I remember, I don't know if you remember George Jackson, who was head of Detroit Economic Development.
Absolutely. Yep, George Jackson.
I remember walking into George's office, and he had a project for the Globe building, which is now the Outdoor Adventure Center.
Right.
And he was going to turn that into housing. And I was able to convince George that if he would give us that building, that we would redevelop it as part of Milliken State Park. But the key to the what got his attention was that I said that we would bring staff down to work in the city, because we had a DNR office in Southfield,
Right.
in a building that was inadequate for us there. And so we were looking for a place to put those individuals. And so we proposed putting them into the Outdoor Adventure Center. Now, I got a lot of flack from DNR employees for that. They didn't want to go. But now if you go down there and you look at the beautiful setting in which they are working in, I'm sure that they don't remember giving me a hard time for moving them from Southfield down to the city of Detroit.
Well, Ronnie, you just brought up another point, and I keep piggybacking off what you're saying, because when I think about that Outdoor Adventure Center, I think about a young man by the name of Bruce Ross, who is a protege of some of your efforts and leadership efforts, and I was listening to Alexis and how she is feeling. How many people, Rodney, do you think have got inspired, got connected, African American, Hispanic, Native American, people who would not normally fit into the outdoor recreation or outdoor natural resources environment, who are now being exposed to it, or who have had careers develop because of things that like this that you did? How much influence do you think that had?
Well, I think that's a very important point, Hurley. I have a friend that always say, you don't know what you don't know. And until individuals are exposed to something, they really don't know about it and stuff. And so my goal was to try to get individuals exposed to the natural resources of the state of Michigan. Before I moved to Michigan in '74, I really thought Michigan was Detroit, Flint, Grand Rapids, and maybe your hometown of Saginaw. I really didn't understand and know the abundance of natural resources that the state of Michigan have. And so what my goal was to, if I got excited about those types of things, I know other people of color would as well. But here's the key, that Michigan was going through a transition when I started working there. Let's take state parks. When I started working for the DNR in '77, 80% of Michigan state parks money came from the state general fund. By the time I was director, only 20% of the money came from general fund, and we had to raise 80% of the funds. And so what I used to tell staff in the DNR, that I would much rather try to raise that 80% from 2 million people than 500,000 people. So we had to expose more people to our state parks and recreation facility. And that goes across the board, from hunting, fishing, state parks, state forests, the whole bit. The more people we can expose, the better chances we will have of having the funding available for us to keep those programs going. So the Adventure Center is key of teaching people about our natural resources and how to use our natural resources. Belle Isle is key. One last point on that subject. I remember when I was chief of Michigan State Parks and Recreation, we had a focus group meeting in Southfield, trying to find out how could we get more people of color involved in our state park system. And we asked people who have visited state parks, regardless of where they were, to come and that focus group meeting. And I was standing in the back room listening. And, a number of people, when they asked the question, do you go to state parks? They say, yes. Where do you go to state parks? In Tennessee, in Kentucky, in Georgia. Have you been to Michigan State Parks? No. Why? Well, I don't see anybody in those places that look like me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so a bell went off in my ear that, even though I knew that, it was almost like confirmation and stuff. And so if we do a better job, when I say I got DNR in my blood, so I'm going to continue to use the word we.
Yeah.
If we do a better job of exposing people to what we have to offer, teach them like places like our Adventure Center, how to utilize and access those places, have people that work in those places that look like them, I think we would get more people into our state parks, into fishing, into hunting, and things of this nature.
That's a really big point, right? Especially when I look at your career, you spent time in the law enforcement arena, you spent time in the state parks, recreation. You were active in forestry. You were active at the fishery and wildlife. So, and I remember sitting in those meetings with the commission, and when the deer hunters came into the meeting, it was as if nothing else mattered in the whole world but hunting, and everything seemed to revolve around it. And I started wondering, as I sat there, and I started wondering, and I look in the audience, right? The people who were coming in to complain about restrictions and this and that, and the audience was not as balanced in the commission meeting as it was, because I knew personally a lot of people of color who hunted, but they didn't feel like they were a part of the hunting community. And so there was a lot of things that I saw the department begin to do, creating free fishing days, creating training days for hunting, just all kinds of things that will begin to take them to places where the larger community could be engaged. And then if I go back again to the question that I was asking before about how you felt about your involvement in becoming a leader in not just the movement of conservation of parks and recreation, but the whole idea of conservation, like you said about parks. What do you think people need to know about how you feel about the conservation movement? You were part of the conversation that we had when President Ronald Reagan did the Commission on Americans Outdoors.
Right.
And it became apparent that many people did not think that communities of color actually engaged in outdoor recreation, but it was a big part. And the conservation movement has always had some investment from the various dimensions of society. But how do you feel about conservation leadership?
Well, I think that as we don't have enough people of color as being part of the decision-making process for conservation. I think because a lot of people may say a lot of people of color don't hunt and fish, but the number is, in my opinion, and what I have seen, particularly on national level and states around the country, that they are out there, they are utilizing, but because you don't see them at Natural Resource Commission meetings, or if you don't see them at public meetings on state forests or things of this nature, you think that their interest is not there. The interest is definitely there. If you go back in the two bond programs that I am aware of, that I worked personally on, the 1988 RAC bond program, and I think the other one was like the 1994, 96, I can't remember, bond program. If you look at where the votes came from to pass those, it came from our urban communities of people of color. So their interest is there. What can we do? Because they vote to tax themselves to take part of them. Well, you were in Wayne County. Wayne County passed the millage for Parks and Recreation. Oakland County passed the millage for Parks and Recreation. So they will vote their money for Parks and Rec and for conservation. But when it comes to finding what their interests are, they're left out of the process and stuff. And so what I would like to do is try to give them a voice at the table. You were one of the leaders of that on the Natural Resources Commission when you established the recreation subcommittee on the Natural Resources Commission.
Yeah.
I'd worked there 30-something years and never had a committee on recreation, a subcommittee on recreation had been formed. We had the Wildlife Committee, Fisheries Committee, Forestry, a number of lands committee, but no one really focused on, quote, recreation. And once you did that, we start seeing a more diverse group of people come and to speak their voice and to want to impact policy as it relates to outdoor recreation in the state.
And in fact, that was one of the things that helped to facilitate the recreation passport, which now all across the country, when you get your the state of Michigan, when you get your driver's license, you get a passport into state parks, and there are a lot of people who have access to state parks because of that, and they're starting to use them. And I think that, Rodney, this is a big point, because you think about how many people that you had a one-on-one conversation with at a conference, at a Michigan Recreation Parks or M-Parks conference or a National Parks conference, or even Park Resources, when you would go and speak to schools and things of that nature, who now all of a sudden saw, well, maybe there's a possibility, maybe there is something there. I remember when my first exposure to recreation as a career came as I was pledging a fraternity. I went on a fraternity visit, and the person that I met was Jesse Rutherford.
Okay.
You remember Jesse Rutherford? He was a recreation director at Ypsilanti. And I didn't realize at that point, I was a freshman in college, but I didn't realize that would cause me to go into the career, and then I would be the next African-American male president of Michigan Recreation and Parks Association behind Jesse Rutherford, and follow Jesse Rutherford all the way, I mean, through the national thing. It's those people who, you had some mentors, I had mentors, and then we became mentors. And there are people now who will find themselves in places in conservation because you dropped that seed in their heart. But now you're retired. You are retired. What does that feel like?
When we talked before it started, I say I'm living my best life. I'm really enjoying retirement, but I have to admit that I really miss the people that I work with, not only within DNR but throughout the parks and recreation profession. It's those individuals that I have met and were just invaluable, not only to my career, but to my life. Like you, they are lifelong friends. I try to keep in touch with them as much as I can. And it's retirement life is great. I mean, I play golf 2 or 3 times a week. I have to have my wife make sure I have date day on Friday. Mm-hmm. And you know, this pandemic has put a strain on things. I have not been. I'm here in Florida now. I haven't been back home to Michigan in a year because we just couldn't travel. I can't wait to get back, but back to Michigan to see my friends there. But other than that, man, retirement is good. Do I miss the DNR? Yes, but what I miss most are the people that work for DNR. As I said, I worked with some wonderful people there and met some friends throughout the state of Michigan and stuff. And so it was just a great career for me.
Rodney, you're missed by the people both in and out of the department and throughout the state because you made relationships mean something. There are so many names that we could talk about, from Jim Beers and Joe Seavey and Eric Reichel. I mean, just so many names that we can mutually talk about, our friends from Parks and Recreation, and it has made our lives richer. I'm richer for being a part of things that you were a part of, and then you let me hang around you. People thought I was somebody because I was with Rodney Stokes. No. I appreciate the fact that you talk about the people, Rodney, because at the end of the day, that's what everything is all about. And that's what your career has been about. You're
exactly right. It's the people, it's the friendships, and the things that we were able to accomplish together. And I don't want no one to have any mistake. The things that we talk about, we've talked about here today, and things that we have accomplished throughout my career, by no means I did those things by myself. You take the Milliken State Park and the Adventure Center and stuff. When the Governor Engler asked us to go down and look at, based on that boat ride, what we could possibly do, it was Vicki Anthus in Parks and Rec and her team that went down, and they came back with ideas and plans that just blew me away. But I took those plans and you know, and we ran with them. You talk about the recreation passport, that recreation advisory, the recreation committee that you established with the chairman of the Natural Resources Commission. You guys encouraged Ron Olson and his staff to go out and look for ways, and they came up. They went, I think it was Montana or one of the western states that had the recreation passport, brought it back. We were able to take that and move that through the legislature and stuff. And fundamentally, that is huge for the state parks and local units of government, because I think it was a wise idea on our part to include local units of government as part of that grant program. But here's the key that I want to point out about that. If you take a look at the state parks, how many state park stickers that were being purchased by residents of Wayne County and Oakland County prior to Belle Isle becoming a state park, and you take a look at what is being purchased in those two counties now, in my opinion, it shows that turning Belle Isle into a state park was a great idea, not only for Belle Isle's sake, because the state could take a better care of it, but it also increased funding for recreation passport, because you have to have a passport to go on Belle Isle and stuff. So it was a win-win situation. You know, sometimes that term is used way too much, but it was a win-win situation for us and stuff, in spite of the beatings I took to make that happen.
Well, you know, there's one thing that many people will not know about, because they're not there during. They see the belt when you come out as a champion, but they don't know what it's like in the ring when you're taking those punches. Rodney, you've had to take some very difficult stances, some very difficult spots, positions, both internally and externally, because it was the right thing to do. If you had to look back, and if you look back over your life and you had to do it over again, those places where you thought that you wouldn't have any friends after this, but you had to do it, those places where you thought, where I'm gonna get hammered, but I'm going in this meeting anyway. If you had to do it all over again, would you do it?
100%, Hurley, because it may sound cliche, but it wasn't about me. You know, it wasn't about me. Those verbal wounds will heal, but when you're looking at the outcome or the possibilities of the outcome for the Detroit riverfront, it's just one example. Belle Isle. Things that we did within state parks. I mean, we had to make some very tough decisions within state parks that a lot of people didn't like, but we did them, and the park system was the better for it and stuff. And so and the same thing as the department as a whole. All of that was bigger than me, and we were looking at the future. And I think those decisions that we made has made not only those communities and the department better, but it has made the state of Michigan better.
I heard this statement, Rodney. I want to share this. We come close to the closing of this. And I heard this statement one time. A person came to me and asked me what I thought about it. They said, what do you think about this statement? The older I get, the more I look for people who remember me when I was young. And I said to them, that's a powerful thing, because the people who remember you when you were young, remember you when you were dreaming. And we've talked through this conversation. We started out with you in Dalton, Georgia, wanting to change the culture, and going through all of your history throughout the DNR, the Michigan Recreation and Parks, the national parks, to the National Urban Park Association, to all of those things, Rodney, and all of you were the conservation leader, national conservation leader. In all of those areas, there had to be something in you that always wanted to change the culture. When you got in the law enforcement division, with State Park, with the state of the DNR, when you were, even with fisheries and wildlife and the culture of how the government, how the department approached things, you wanted to change it because you had a dream, a vision back when you were a teenager about how things ought to be. And that still stays today.
It still stays today, Hurley. And, even though I'm not working for an agency like the Department of Natural Resources, I still get calls. I'm still involved. A friend of mine who is working on the board of a golf course in Washington, D.C. It was a historical golf course that's owned by the National Park Service. And when blacks in D.C. Got forced off of one golf course, and this was the one that they ended up having to play in, well, it's come on hard times. And so they are now looking to try to redevelop it. So he's asking me, questions of how can we go about doing this and stuff. And I told him, I said, the National Park Service run a grant program. And if it's their land, why don't you guys try to approach them about getting funding for that? So I'm still getting questions from around the country about grants, about other kinds of stuff to try to make things better for people. And I think I'll continue to do that until the day, the Lord calls me home.
Well, the state of Michigan has benefited because we had the privilege of having you. I'm benefited because I had the privilege of having you not only as an example, but a great friend. We both share moments, and we were speaking before we started this interview about one of our mutual friends, Ernest Burkeen, who, if he were with us, he would be a part of our conversation right now, because
absolutely,
there were moments when we would get finished with Michigan Recreation Parks or a conference or where we are, and then we would sit for hours and just talk about what it is that we could do and to help to make things happen. And I'm so glad that the DNR took the opportunity to lift you up as a Black history hero, as a person that the department could look at as someone who led the charge to help to change the culture, help to improve the state of affairs, not just for your people, not just for African Americans, but for the entire state of Michigan. And so I'm excited. If you had one thing though, Rod, that you wish people knew about what you did as a Parks and Recreation, or as a conservation leader, department leader, that they don't know, that people just don't know about, what would you want them to know?
That's a tough question. My life was pretty much an open book, but I just want people to know, and I may not be talked about enough, is that I cared more for the people that I worked with in the department and outside the department than I did for the actual resources themselves. And the reason for that was, if I could give them the tools and the things to do their job, then the resources would benefit from that and stuff. And so if you take care of the people will take care of the resources. And that was kind of my mantra while I worked there. But we're getting near the end. But one of the things I want to add right before we go, I want to say thank you to the director, Dan Eichinger, for number one, having a program like this. I wish the tools and the ideas were there when I was there. We would have done this more often, but more importantly, for creating a position that Alexis is in, so that I think in the long run, it's going to benefit the department, because once we get to know each other better and begin to work with each other more, I think we'll be able to knock down those barriers that keep us apart. So I just want to give a shout out to Dan for that.
I agree with you. Dan is it's really important for me from my perspective. Rodney, I was blown away the other week when I got a notice from Wayne County that they they were talking about me in Black History Month because I was the first African American director of Wayne County Parks, and I just, you don't look for things like that to happen, but it's such a wonderful thing to be thought about like that, and for me to be asked to be a part of this conversation, I appreciate the department. I appreciate Dan and the entire team, Alexis, for allowing me to share this moment with my good friend, because Rodney, if it hadn't been for people who sowed into our lives to encourage us along the way, provide mentorship, sometimes mentorship comes from the most unobvious places. And, I never forget my first Michigan Recreation and Parks Association conference, and I was standing with Joe Seavey and Jim Beers in the back of the conference room, and they were telling stories, and what that did to allow us to be a part, and people make waves, and you are a mentor for so many. It's just a wonderful thing. So I applaud the department for taking the time to do this. And Alexis, I'm not sure how much time we got going on. I could ask Rodney some other questions about his golf score and about whether or not he's telling the truth with his scorecards.
We won't go there.
Well, we do have some questions, and so I do want to ask you, Reverend Coleman, where you are, can you see the chat, or would you like me to read the questions?
Go ahead, you can go ahead and read them.
Okay. So the first question that I have that came from our director, Dan Eichinger, reads, first to Rodney and Hurley, thank you so much for this great conversation. My question is about mentorship. I was fortunate that when I joined the department, Rodney took me under his wing and was my mentor. Who were some of the mentors who helped guide you, and who you relied upon in your career?
Okay, I'll start off. Mine goes back in my hometown. There was a gentleman named Henry Anderson, who was as I said, it was a segregated Parks and Recreation Department, and Henry Anderson came in from South Carolina to be the director of the rec center. We called it a rec center, but it was a glorified room with pool tables, ping pong tables, and things. But anyway, this gentleman got me interested in Parks and Recreation, hired me when I was 12 because I hung around the pool all the time, and I learned a lot from him. And then I came to the DNR, and Joe Seavey, who was head of DNR's Recreation Service Division. I spent many days talking to Joe about the profession, about where we need to go, how the DNR could be more involved in local communities and local individuals' lives and stuff. And really just kind of laid the foundation for me to be able to think and do some of the things that I did. And it became a passion for me, but really the vision was started by Joe Seavey. So when he retired, and I really missed him, and so that's one of my great mentors that I remember as well.
Awesome. This one was posted anonymous. What advice would you give the department's DEIJ team? So a little background, we put together a department diversity, equity, and inclusion team a little over a year ago. And that's a team of about 30 folks from all over the department who help inform and provide recommendations on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So any advice?
The advice I would give is that I would really feel that the director needs to have some connection with that committee. Meet with them. I'm not saying monthly, but often enough that the rest of the department knows that it is a priority for the director. And I would say to the committee, dream big. Dream big. I mean, you'll never know when an opportunity will present itself. And I've always had the attitude that I'd rather be prepared with something to go and the opportunity never comes than to have an opportunity to come and not be prepared. So I would say to the committee, dream big and work hard and push back and I also had the opportunity. It's easier to gain forgiveness than get permission.
Love it. We have a question from Ben Travis that says, would you discuss what major changes to make within state parks to be able to attract and retain more diverse users for parks in Southern Michigan, Northern, Lower, and Upper Peninsula? Are there differences in these changes between geographic regions? Thank you.
Yes, there are differences. And I think one of the things that we should do, and as I said earlier, I use we because I still feel I'm part of the department. I think we should use Belle Isle, the Adventure Center, and some of our Southern Michigan parks as laboratories to teach people how to utilize our state parks. I remember when I was chief of Michigan State Parks and Recreation, some of the staff told me when I was trying to get them to get more diversity and use of our parks. And they said, well, Chief Stokes, those individuals, they come to our parks and they stay by the campsite. They're scared to go down a trail or they're scared to do this or this. I said, well, if I carried you down to the city of Detroit and asked you to walk down the alley, you would be scared too. I mean, so you'd have to work with them and teach them to how to utilize our state parks. As I said in my statement earlier, you don't know what you don't know. But to me, it's our job to be able to teach and introduce new things to people so that they could better utilize and enjoy the experience that they have before them.
Awesome. Thank you for that answer. I've got a fun one, and this is from Linda Walter, I believe. It says, Rodney, how do you stay so good looking after all of these years? What's your secret?
Well, first of all, Linda, thank you for that compliment. I have no idea. It must be the genes. It must be the Stokes genes that's in me that's doing that. But my wife makes sure that I take care of myself. She, in fact, she got on to me this morning because I didn't get up and go walking. I said, well, I got this interview I got to prepare for. That's 12 o'clock. You could have gotten 5 miles in by now. So I try to exercise. Don't do a very good job on it, but I do have someone in my life who constantly stays on me about taking care of myself.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that insight. We've got another fun one. I don't know. This one might be I don't know. This is a brain teaser or a quick test. You tell me. I'll read slow. It says, Rodney was the Brett Favre of the DNR. He was there, retired, came back, was there again, retired, came back. I think a total of 3 or 4 times. I've had the honor and pleasure of working with Rodney from the onset of my DNR career in 1988, when he was the chief of the real estate division on up through parks until he finally retired retired for real from the director's position. I also had the privilege of working with Reverend Coleman when he was on the commission, another highlight of my career. Rodney always had an open door policy and has remained a great friend throughout the years. Who am I?
Oh, wow. They still work for the department, huh?
I believe so. Now if the person's still on, why don't you share who you are, because I did not see a name come through on that.
Oh, wow. Let me think here.
That's a hard one.
Yeah. Still works for DNR Real Estate. Oh, wow.
That could be so many people.
Yeah, I'm drawing a blank here. So reveal yourself to me.
Let's hope they come forward because they haven't shared it. I just noticed that. Okay, yeah, if you ask that question, let us know who you are. This is fun. I've got another question. This is from someone named JKJ, I believe, Jenny Conjax. In your own words, what was it like being director of DNR as a person of color? It has been mostly a male-dominated role, but looking at the past directors, most of them were white and male. It also is a pleasure listening to your experiences during the season. So the question is, what was it like being the director as a person of color?
I would have to say within the department, my experience was really good, really good. The problem that I had was with actually some legislators who didn't want me in the job, primarily because at first I thought it was because of my Democratic background, but then there were some things that touched on where I thought it was more of a race issue. However, not being one that's going to back down on a challenge, I stayed true to who I was and who I am. And when I left the DNR, and in fact, I just got a note about 3 or 4 months ago from a couple of employees who had issues with the legislature, and I had to go over with them on some issues. And the employees were thanking me for being supportive of them in that action. And they felt like in the past, some directors would not back them and would try to please the legislature. But my goal was right is right. If my staff was wrong, I let my staff know. If I felt the staff was right, then I'm there with you 100% and stuff. And so that's just the philosophy that I had, and I would always try to work that. But there was a group, not only in the legislature, but there was a faction of a couple of other interest groups that didn't want me there, made it known to me that they didn't want me there. And a couple of the interest group leaders, I gave them my cell phone and that they could number and they could reach me anytime. And they were really surprised about that. They says, why would you do this? I said, why not? I mean, if you have an issue, you don't have to go through a secretary. You don't have to go through a division chief. If you have an issue with me, call me directly and we'll deal with it and stuff. It actually changed one of the individual's opinion of me because of that and stuff. And so, like I said, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. But, politics sometimes get in the way.
Awesome. Thank you for that. That concludes our question and answering. I will say the person did step up. It's Yolanda Taylor. So you should have known from our comment.
I should have known that. Yeah, Yolanda.
She also sent a picture that we could pop up from back in the old days, but that might have to be sent later.
I asked Yolanda to hide those pictures. She sent me a couple, and I said, we really shouldn't show those to anyone because though that was about 35 pounds ago. So.
Well, I just want to say thank you, a huge thank you to you, Director Stokes and Reverend Coleman, for joining us today, to sharing your insight, inspiring us and connecting us to the history, but then also to the amazing things that you all are currently doing, and just being able to tap in with us still. We're incredibly grateful. So I just want to thank everyone for attending. You will receive an email link with the survey. We're going to ask everyone to fill that out. So please let us know how you felt about the event, logistics, what you want to see in the future, so we can make sure that we provide it. Thank you all again, and you'll all get information about Women's History Month events that are upcoming, and we hope that you can join us for those next month. Thank you so much, and you all have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you, and tell the director and Judy I said hello.
Will do.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you, Rod.
All right.